This is Stephen James of Post Death Soundtrack, and we're here to talk about his new album, Veal Lifter, and more. So, James, first of all, I'd like to ask you how let's take things back to the beginning of Post Death Soundtrack. Um, and can you talk us through how you started Post Death Soundtrack?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a revolving door project. It was co-founded by myself and my friend Kenneth Buck. We were both in like hardcore punk metal bands at the time, and we wanted to have a project where we could experiment freely. So it started as a bedroom project, literally. Um,
Okay.
and it allowed us to explore a bunch of the other styles that we were into, namely industrial music like Skinny Puppy, as well as some hip hop elements, psychedelia, things like that. It was a little bit of a project where we could go all over the place. And we started off just the two of us in his bedroom, writing and recording music as weaponry. That was released in 2008, and strangely, I think that album holds up. It's just a kind of an ugly underground expression. And for the next release, we recorded in Vancouver, not Calgary, because Kenneth had moved there, and we recruited Colin Everall on drums, and he also played piano on one song, and John Ireson on bass and helping with production and things like that. So that album went in a much more psychedelic, experimental direction.
Mm.
From there, constantly evolving. Kenneth ended up moving over to the East Coast, and we leaned up to being a duo of myself and John Ireson. So we worked on a third album called It Will Come Out of Nowhere. Um, and it went back to a bit of a heavier industrial sound, mixed with some electronica experimentation. And that was pressed on vinyl with a cover from Colin Everall. That was a original statue that he did. A really strange, horrific thing. Um, and fast forward to the most recent album, Veil Lifter. That was a complete change in style. We decided we wanted to, fuse a mixture of the music that we loved and still listen to growing up. So, Nirvana, Alice in Chains, Stone Temple Pilots, um, that kind of Tool, that kind of stuff, mixed with modern doom and sludge metal, Russian Circles, Mastodon, Windhand, Yob, uh, and then also mixing in to that mix, you know, some thrash like Injustice for All never really goes away from me. I'm always chasing the riff,
Mm.
and some hardcore punk as well. So those four genres, they just kind of fuse together really nicely. So
Yeah.
90s mixed with all this, and they ended up just making a singular sound that we wanted. So it was a challenge for me to write this album. Uh, write all the guitars, all the vocals, and John contributed bass. Um, and really, we just wanted that singular sound with no ballads, no electronica, no breaks, just visceral. Pretty much the album I've always wanted to make since hearing albums like In Utero and Dirt.
Yeah, with all those genres that you just mentioned, but just not
Mm,
electronica kind of side of things.
exactly. We've
So
already
it's still
explored
quite
that quite.
eclectic, an eclectic album.
Yeah, I mean they go together really seamlessly. So even though it's, I think it's an exciting album. There's a lot of ups and downs. It's still the singular sound that I wanted,
Mm,
and it goes together really well. We've explored electronica enough in the past, so and I could always start side projects to explore, a more heavily experimental side. But I've found that in recent years, I really like bands that I can put on their record and it's kind of a singular monolithic sound. And it's not that every song sounds the same or anything like that. It's just that you can tell that this is one mission that the band has, and they're not doing like an Indian raga on one song and then trip hop on the next.
yeah,
It's not like a totally mixed bag. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting the journey you've had with Post Death Soundtrack, because when I first came across you guys, it's clear that you were or are a band. But speaking to you over the last couple of months, I was starting to think like, oh, is this just like a one man solo project, or um,
It
what
is now
exactly?
actually.
Yeah,
In moving back to Calgary, uh, I decided to start writing album number 5, and I will be working with Casey Lewis again on drums and mixing and mastering because um, he really brought a lot of life into the album and made it pretty pummeling. So
mm,
really happy with his work. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, you post death soundtrack really has gone through quite a journey, because you started, what year was it? You actually kind of formed initially?
Started in 2006. So yeah, just like so many bands, it's more of a project than a band, but it's definitely had a revolving door of members, and that's been mostly just because of practical aspects. People have uh, gotten into other interests and um, gone their own way and everything. Uh, Myself, this is what I wake up in the morning for, and it's my baby. So um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm here.
It's funny
Yeah.
actually you just said that, because I just thought in my head, you've been the consistency throughout post death soundtrack. So this really is your baby, I think, more than anyone else's. And that term popped up in my head, your baby, and you just said it. So yeah, that's quite a yeah.
Yeah, and being the lyricist and voice, this is my outlet. So, ever since growing up in a private nasty private school that was like Lord of the Flies, and discovering artists like Nirvana and Alice in Chains, light bulb went on.
Mm,
I opened the lyric book, uh, also Public Enemy, funnily enough, opened the lyric book to Fear of a Black Planet, and it says, Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant shit to me. Straight up racist, that sucker was simple and plain. Motherfuck him and John Wayne. And at that moment,
mm.
sorry for swearing on the podcast, but
No, that's fine.
at that moment, I was blown away because I thought, you can say whatever you want. This music thing, this is it. Like this is what I want to do. And same thing with reading the In Utero lyrics. Like you can say and do whatever you want.
Mm,
This is the best thing in the world, and this is what I want to do. Um, especially with post the soundtrack, I want it to ultimately connect with people who might be suicidal or have mental illness difficulties or other, trauma challenges in their lives. Um, of course, I wanted to. It's there for everybody, but um, that's one of the special kind of connections and missions of the project, and why I wanted it to be just uncensored. Because when you
yeah.
listen to Alice in Chains' "Dirt," he's talking about depression in a really raw, unfiltered way.
Mm,
And a lot of people find that, kind of uncouth or scary or something like that. But I always found it really comforting. Oh my God, you know, this guy gets it. So,
yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. We can talk more about that when we come to kind of unpack some of the meanings behind the songs shortly. But
hmm.
so what did you wrote the songs for this album, and you're the vocalist. Did you play anything? Did you play any other instruments or
Yeah, I played all the guitars.
the guitars? So the lead
Yeah,
guitar and vocals.
yeah,
Mm.
lead and rhythm. Yeah,
And
yeah, it's multi-layered.
yeah, okay. And just to go back to your history before we move forward, where did you start as a musician, um, playing music?
Yeah,
Or was it?
I started playing music at about age 13, so like 93. And I I learned guitar was my first instrument, so took lessons for maybe 2 years, just enough uh, to get a scope of it. And from there, I just uh, was interested in writing. So once
Mm,
I got good enough to write riffs that I wanted to write and put them together, that's what I started doing. And I started recording demos um, at age 15, 16. And of course, they weren't that great at first, but I would go around and sell them at my school and all that. I had an initial project called The Oracle. And then in 2000, I started a project called Inner Surge. And it started off, it was like a Tool influenced metal band. It started off as a solo project, and then I recruited band members, and we played live all over Calgary.
mm,
In the It ended up becoming more of like a hardcore metal band, politically charged in the last few years. Um, 2006, we released an album called Signals Screaming. 2008, we released an album called An Offering, which that one still holds up, and it's a pretty raging metal album. In 2009, I released as a duo The Unraveling, 13 Arcane Hymns. And after that, we were working on a second album, Terra Hole and the Collective Vision, which is on exclusively on Bandcamp, and it's kind of there's some great tracks on there, but it's kind of unfinished as well.
mm.
Um, that band dissolved. I ended up getting cancer in 2011,
Oh,
so I kind of thought it was all over, and in surgery most of that year. After that, I moved to Vancouver and um, did projects here and there. I did another industrial duo called He Is Me, and we have some tracks on Spotify. We're going to be doing some new material soon. But other than that, yeah, there was a bit of a gap. I was always writing, but
mm.
yeah, bit of a
So
gap.
it all started in Calgary,
Yes, it
and
started
then
in
you moved
Calgary,
to Toronto, and now you're back in Calgary.
or
Yeah.
moved to Vancouver.
Sorry,
Now I'm back in
Vancouver.
Calgary. Yeah,
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 now you're back in Calgary. Right.
yeah.
So I've heard you mention Tool quite a few times so far. I'm guessing Tool is a big kind of influence of yours. Could you tell us like maybe two or three other big influences for your music?
Yeah. I would say, what specifically Tools Anima for me, it is a huge influence because I listen to it almost daily, as a teen. There's something about the tone really blew me away. Um, Nirvana, of course, is a massive influence. The Beatles, believe it or not, huge influence. Alice in Chains.
Mm.
Uh, and as far as current bands, I would say Russian Circles, really consistent band with just a massive sound.
Mm.
Um, Mastodon's last album was excellent. Hushed and Grim, Windhand, have a really sludgy sound. And I believe they use Nirvana's producer. So the thing I like about doom music is it's essentially grunge music slowed down to a crawl. So,
Yeah, yeah,
it just makes it sludgier and heavier. So they're kind of brother and sister genres. I like
yeah,
Yob a lot too, for that reason. It's very expansive, epic doom.
yeah.
Um, and other than that, I mean, I listen to You know, I listen to a ton of everything. I listen to everything from John Coltrane to Aphex Twin,
Mm.
although those don't necessarily find their way into my music. Um, Same thing with Meshuggah. I
What's
could
the
try to
sugar?
write a Meshuggah riff, which there is some influence of Meshuggah on this album, but it just doesn't go too far because
Yeah,
I can't quite play those patterns.
yeah. And what would you say inspires your writing? What do you write about in your music?
Yeah. Well, what I write about tends to be inspired by a mixture of living a life, uh, living a life through depression, um, which is obviously difficult to do, difficult to be functional, and I've had major depressive disorder since I can remember, probably age 12 or 13.
Mm.
So when you experience something like that, um, it tends to color your expression, um, and also a keen interest in meditation, philosophy, and spirituality since my teen years,
Mm.
which was likely fueled by the depression, looking for um, a means of letting go, of finding inner calm, all of
Mm.
that.
Mm.
And what I end up doing is there's two ways to express depression. Um, you can be super direct, like Porn, Nine Inch Nails, Linkin Park. Their lyrics are just like I'm upset, essentially,
Yeah.
um, which is not my style at all. You probably noticed on Veil Lifter. I I have um, I have really tried to perfect putting everything into strong metaphor. So even if there's a situation that has been traumatic, or um, someone who, if there's an instance of betrayal or something like that, um, it'll be completely metaphoric and more painting a picture of
Mm.
the emotion rather than being too direct with it.
Mm.
And I've always found that to be more powerful. Like a lot of Kurt Cobain's lyrics seem a little nonsensical, but when you think about the way that he's singing them, it can be a lot more impactful because you think, oh, he's upset enough to say this weird thing, or this line that appears kind of zen or throws you off or makes you contemplate. To me, that's a lot better than just coming out with totally direct lyrics. So I like to kind of paint things in a metaphorical way, and
Yeah. Yeah.
just having lines like "Deep in the shadow, they know you by name." Um, writing about so writing about going through hard times. I'll have references to like being in the shadow or things like that.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, and I think you're right about speaking of these things metaphorically. It provokes a bit more thought, I think, towards it. And thank you for opening up about that. And obviously, it relates to what you said earlier about you wanting to speak to people with depression and with mental health issues and things like that, which I think is great. That's what music's for, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that will um, console in that and console in your music. So that's really good. Um, if you were to describe your music to um, people who have never heard it before, in 3 words, do you think you could do that? I mean, I would say the first word would be metaphorical. And how else would you describe your music to people who've never heard it? Maybe in one sentence, if you can. I know that's difficult, but
Yeah, I would say metaphorical and philosophical,
mm,
heavy metal,
yeah,
or grungy heavy metal
yeah,
with doom thrash and punk. I mean, uh, they kind of go together seamlessly, and it's sort of the best way to describe what we do because you know when you hear it, it has all those elements and it gives people an idea of what to expect.
yeah, yeah. And if anyone watching this, if you like any of those, what Stephen just mentioned, you better go and check it out for sure, um, because it really hits those notes perfectly. Um, yeah, and so let's move on to Veil Lifter, specifically the new album that you released was a couple of months ago. Am I correct?
Yeah, just April 16th.
Yeah, so last April, Veil Lifter. Um, what would you say was the biggest challenge you faced writing and recording that album, and how did you deal with that? You can think
Biggest
about.
challenge, biggest challenge I think for me is basically I hadn't written an album myself on guitar, all the guitars, all the guitar layers and vocals in quite some time. So it was a positive challenge for me.
Mm,
Sometimes it's really about because I can sit down on a guitar and typically come up with um, two or three ideas that I really like. I would once I kind of catch that lighting, I immediately record it on my phone, put everything in Dropbox, and you end up with hundreds of options.
mm,
So one of the challenges is I keep my song structures fairly simple. So one of the challenges is you have a verse riff that you like, and you decide on that. Now we need to decide on a pre-chorus, a chorus riff, and make sure that they all flow together. And it's essentially it's not the writing or the coming up with ideas that's the problem. It's the it's a small problem. It's just making the
arranging.
final decision,
Yeah,
just deciding on it. And a lot of artists have trouble uh, just letting things go and saying, okay, that's good. I'm going to move on now.
I
A lot of
definitely
a lot
agree.
of artists sort of dilly dally and consider all the possible options, and they think it's perfectionism, but it's not. There really is an art to knowing when to just when it's good, let it
Yeah,
go.
move
Um,
forward.
so yeah, so it was an exercise in letting go and just when you think something is potent and you like it, there you go, stick with it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's
make the process a little faster and more visceral when it comes out.
yeah, and I think you just described a challenge that so many artists face, and I think you've given a brilliant piece of advice there. Um, in that you need to just move forward sometimes, and and make the decision and move forward as soon as it sounds good, instead of having, pondering with all these options. I mean, I know producers, like dance music producers, who have hundreds of tracks, maybe even thousands of tracks on their hard drive.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and they might have just released, one or two out of those, and it's crazy. It's like, just finish a few more of them and put them out, and I'll hear them, and
Yeah.
oh, most of them sound great, and I'm like, well, these sound better than half the stuff in the charts. Like, you need to put this stuff out there, but like you say, a lot of artists struggle with that. That's a great piece of advice I think you've given. Um,
It happens a lot during the production phases too.
hmm,
Like often releases will take way longer than they should just because of tinkering, you know. So um yeah, things really lifted off and got done very efficiently, especially once Casey uh once we handed everything into Casey and he played drums over it all, mixed and mastered. It was all completed pretty quickly. Yeah.
nice, nice. And what is the meaning behind the title, Veil Lifter? It's quite an interesting title. What's the meaning behind that?
Yeah, there's a quote in Eastern philosophy. Like I read a lot of Eastern philosophy and everything from Hinduism to Buddhism to Advaita and um all that. And I get a lot of inspiration from it. Things like the Bhagavad Gita too. And there's a quote uh about lifting the veil of ignorance. So the whole concept is that we see the world in a very divisive way. We see the universe in a as a form of division. And when we're walking down the street, we consider ourselves a completely uh, divided and separate entity.
Mm.
Whereas lifting the veil of ignorance implies more seeing things uh, as a whole, as one interacting uh, consciousness, essentially. So, um, seeing reality clearly and as it is, as opposed to projecting our endless, ceaseless thoughts and ideas onto it.
Mm.
Just lifting the veil of ignorance and seeing things clearly. When you see things clearly, you you stop lying to yourself. You stop say. I find that a lot of people go through lives with scripts and they're telling themselves platitudes and things like that. And I've recently gone through a process where I've just stopped telling myself those things, and sometimes that can be difficult. Um, but when you don't lie to yourself, things can be a lot easier, and it's easier to communicate and move forward and all that. But you do notice how people often have their own scripts and they're just like they're almost trying to. A lot of them believe it too, but many times they're almost just trying to make themselves believe it.
Yeah,
Self-help, all that. Yeah. So
yeah.
it's very much about just seeing truth and seeing things clearly.
Lifting the veil of ignorance. That's really interesting. That's great. Um, and so in terms of some of the songs on this album, I just want to ask you some questions about them. First of all, who is the killer of the doubt in that song, the killer of the doubt? Is that
Oh,
anyone in particular? And if so, who might that be?
yeah. Well, a lot of them are just metaphors that like that one refers to me. Um, so essentially, after being through um, you know, trauma and relationship, like, divorces where uh, animals were stolen and things like that that can be traumatic. You know, I have the lyrics in that song. Spirit woke when his body hit the ground. Here is something that cannot be devoured. So it's essentially saying there's the inner spirit, the inner being, um, can't be touched, can't be, um, can't be harmed in any possible way.
Mhm.
So yeah. So being the killer of the doubt, um, you know, it's almost like to do anything in life, you must have purity, you must have no doubt, you know. Um, so I'll be the killer of the doubt.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. And also another one that like came out at me was Low Down Animal. Um,
Yeah,
love it if you explain kind of the meaning behind that one.
yeah. Um, I I took on the sort of persona of the hyena, after, same thing, after said divorce that was almost like it was almost like a Hollywood movie level of horrificness. And so originally, the hyena reference came in on the last song of It Will Come Out of Nowhere, the 2019 release. And the lyrics for that part were I'll be the hyena, unwelcome drifter. Um, uh, and then there's a lyric about I'll be the trident of Shiva, which I have right there.
Right.
Um, spiritual weaponry there comes into play. Um, but the hyena is really unique to me because they're often treated with fear and contempt and like unwelcome drifters, and they're very terrifying in that sense. But also, they're not as dominating on their own as a lion or a bear, where you know exactly what to expect.
Mm.
They have to be craftier. They have to be sneakier, and they have to work together. So that's the whole that's the whole meaning behind um, starting a pack right now, because men, when they go through traumatic situations, they often isolate themselves, and that's exactly what I did. Um, I isolated myself for quite a long time, and I notice a lot of the people in my circle are really talented, who they either do music, podcasts, radio, magazines, things like that. And as men, we often do that. We often isolate ourselves. So I've started kind of like a networking pack where we're there for each other for support and just general mental health, but we're also linking to support each other's projects, because otherwise, if you're isolating, when you release something, it might get a little bit of traction, but if you have a whole army behind you, if you have a whole pack, and we all rally together. Um, so Low Down Animal was basically just it's like an outsider song, and it's how I felt when when you reach an uncontrollable situation and life is total chaos, then you may just have to throw your hands up and be like, okay, all right, uh, I'll be the hyena then,
Right, so there's a lot of interesting meanings behind the songs on this album, and as well as being great music. Um, and
Thank
there's one
you.
song I'd like to talk about, and it sounds like it might relate to kind of trauma or mental health in some way also. But maybe you can talk us through how you wrote Icy Underground from this album. Um,
Yeah, I see Underground. The It's kind of a dystopian song. So um sort of referring to how we're all down here waiting for Providence. We all have our particular beliefs and hopes, and ranging from, I had some Jehovah's Witnesses at my door the other day, and they told me the good news that the future is going to get better. I thought, oh, I certainly hope so. Um, so like we're all down here really generally not quite knowing what's going on, and often pretending that we do, and telling each other, and we're all it's sort of bugging each other with our ideas. And Icy Underground, the lyrics are really forceful in the verses, and very much just trying to do away with a lot of those ideas. Then the chorus imagines sort of a letting go of a trek to the icy underground. So I imagine kind of healing waters, and just a symbol for letting go of our ideas, who we think we are, often our stresses, our traumas, our pains. So ironically, the chorus is kind of a positive concept. Is rare for me. Even though I see the album as being full of love, because um, even though it seems uh, it definitely explores a lot of dark topics. Um, it's intended to inspire people to pick up their sword and rise up in their own way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. And could you give us like a lyric from that song that you really find powerful?
Um, I like the line that it opens up with, in this room only elephants, bury all the evidence. Truth is of no consequence, bury all the evidence. So a lot of that song is just a bit of a commentary on our modern world.
Yeah.
Definitely in US politics, for example, or with pretty much anything in the news. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist myself. I'm quite a practical thinker. Um, However, one thing that conspiracy theorists often think about practical thinkers is, you know, your sheep, or whatever it is. It's
Mm.
like you ain't no wolf. But basically, being a practical thinker, you do have a balanced perspective, and you know, we still do see very clearly that um, it's mostly lies that are out there. It might not be just. I don't necessarily agree that it's a blanket truth that just 100% of everything you see is a lie.
Mm.
Um, where some people around me tell me, I'm like, yeah, maybe 80%, 80, 90% could be.
Mm.
Um, but the whole idea that truth is of no consequence, truth doesn't really matter anymore. Like if you look at, if, like, say Trump and US politics, the conservatives, they just they just make things up now very blatantly, and their followers do too. Same thing with recent conspiracy waves. They're really just choosing their own adventure. They're honestly just making shit up.
Mm.
And I'm sure it's fun to do, but I would rather look at things a little differently. And so there's a lot of lines that are kind of meant to be forceful, but they're sarcastic as well. Just a commentary on our world. People just choosing what they want. Yeah,
Using their own realities, basically. Yeah.
exactly.
I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And I think that's great. That's a great lyric. truth is of no consequence, and you just said like truth doesn't really matter anymore. And when you do look around at the world, it seems like more and more like that. Yeah. So that's really interesting, and I think it's great that you've um kind of written a song about that. That's really good. So next, on at Soundsite Mag, we cover independent music and independent artists only. Um,
Mhm.
so I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what's the best thing about being an independent artist?
The best thing about being an independent artist is you make your own calls, you make your own business plan, um, and everything that you do uh, separates yourself from those who don't put that effort in and don't do that. You know, for example, um, Post Death Soundtrack is about to launch um, a Shopify store with, let me just check if this is the right shirt here. With these
Nice.
hyena shirts,
Fine.
along with the vinyl for the last album, CDs from the first album, and we're about to add baseball caps with the custom Post Death Soundtrack logo, as well as new a new T-shirt design that's going to be based on Veil Lifter, the goat skull or the ram skull that you see on the front.
Hmm.
That's going to be like another logo um, with the Post Death font and Veil Lifter with the two arrows. Um, and a meaning that I figured out for the ram is that it's likely the only creature that can survive uh, on the mountain of unbecoming on the cover. So he's a perfect companion for the Veil Lifter character. Um, yeah, basically, it's once again, it's choose your own adventure. So the more effort that you put in, the more you reach out to, um, you know, appropriate magazines, blogs, podcasts, um, because a lot of artists just expect opportunities to magically come to them, but they put all their money into production and they're just like, oh, this is great. There's no way people aren't going to like this. Oh yeah, people won't hear it. You know, um, you need to advertise. Sure, you need to consistently advertise. Um, Meta, Google Ads, advertise your YouTube videos, um, and make sure everything's connected, you know, make sure it's like a growing organism and that you're constantly putting energy into it.
Yeah, some great advice there, and definitely important to have that approach as an independent artist and be business savvy for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. What about in terms of creativity? Do you think of a benefit that, you know, not being signed to a label has on specifically your kind of creative practice?
Well, I think the only way to be as an artist, at least from my perspective, is the art only has value if it's extremely potent to you and it's exactly what you want to do.
Mm.
And never ever let anybody like there's so much of a feedback industry these days, and artists accept feedback from people all around them, from you know like managers and non-musicians and people in the circle, um and they even the thing that amazes me the most, they even ask for feedback. They're like, we really want, you know, how are we going to brand ourselves and how are we going to shape our sound. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, the way that it should be is you play from your goddamn soul,
Mm.
like your life depends on it, and then you hand that shit in. There's no other way, no other way to be a good artist or like a true artist. Make something ugly if you want to.
Mm.
You put it You put it on the desk, and that's that. And if anybody ever tries to get you to play something more catchy, um, or shift your sound in some way, tell them to screw off.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the
Spoken like a
only
true,
way to keep it pure. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's art for sure. And spoken like a true independent artist there. That's great. Um, yeah, that's absolutely what we're about here as well. That sounds like Mag is definitely everything you just said. Do you have anything else planned for 2024? Or is it just promoting this album now that you've got planned for?
It's going to be promoting this album pretty heavily. I'm working with a few different metal PRs right now. So as a result, we're getting a lot of radio and podcast play, a lot of like magazine features, things like that. In the meantime, I'm about to start working on album number 5. I already have a bunch of ideas for it, saved in Dropbox, but a lot of it's just going to be fresh because I just want to capture, you know, where I'm at right now and going forward. Um, I'm also going to be doing some other projects. Looking to start a duo with former Inner Surge guitarist Scott Taylor, and it looks like we're going to be doing some pretty heavy material there. And I'm going to be doing a 4-song EP with actually my Texas rapper close friend Jay Morris. So he's excellent, and he's one of my closest friends too. Um, he's going to be doing his thing ultimately, and I'll just be adding like a kind of eerie atmospheric guitars. So if you think like um, how Cypress Hill always has really cool bass lines and leads, it's going to be kind of like that mixed with a little bit of doom energy, trap
Wow,
and doom mixed together. So yeah,
sounds
that'll be fun. Yeah, but I'm mostly excited about working on the follow up to Veil Lifter.
yeah. Well, that kind of leads me to my last question, really. You've kind of answered it pretty much already. But lastly, I was going to ask you, what are your goals for um, the years ahead, really? And you pretty much
Yeah,
just summed up there, I think.
I like to go step by step up the mountain, mainly because I know that so many artists have these crazy lofty goals, and they, oh, I want 2 million streams, and it's like start with 10,000, and see
Yeah.
see how we go. Um, but I consider like I'm basically doing just like promotional blitz for this album, and it's going to continue. So things are really piling up. We're getting new fans all the time. Um, People are joining the pack. So stronger the pack gets, the more possibility there is.
Mm.
So I do. I want to create a really strong legacy with this, and have each album uh, expand on the last and be better in some ways. I'd like the next album to actually be a little bit heavier, um, believe it or not. But so when I was, when I get told, oh, make your sound a little catchier, I'm like, no, I'm going
I'm going to
heavier.
go the other way.
Um, yeah. Um, and I'd also like to bring this live and tour and all that. Um, but really, right now, it's a building phase. So I want to essentially um, just grow the audience to high heaven, and then have more options from there, and just make it as big as it can possibly be.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Well, if you'd like to join the pack and listen to Veil Lifter, check out Post their soundtrack, check out their socials and their Spotify, and we're going to include all the links to all of that stuff in the description and in our link in bio, and of course the article when we publish it. So thanks a lot, Stephen, for chatting to us.
Thank you so much, Edwin. Take care.
Yeah, you too.